All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're building your ultimate FSC and A-level biology toolkit by mapping an incredible biological journey, starting from ancient fossils in deep time all the way to modern, thriving rainforests. We've designed this specifically as a highly structured visual blueprint to maximize your understanding and perfectly align with your syllabus, stripping away the fluff and zeroing in strictly on exactly what you need to know for your exams.
Here's our agenda. We have precisely 6 zones to cover today. First up is evolution and chronospecies, followed by the incomplete fossil record. Then we'll hit genetic variation, biomes, rainforest stratification, and finish up with a high-yield exam summary.
Now, before we start defining our terms, imagine trying to read a completely gripping history book, but someone has randomly torn out half the pages. How incredibly difficult would it be to trace a single family's lineage? Well, that is exactly the puzzle evolutionary biologists are up against every single day.
Part 1. Evolution and chronospecies. Let's look at the mechanisms of deep time. Here's your first major definition. A chronospecies is a sequence of temporally successive populations within a single evolving lineage. So, what does that actually mean? Picture a chronospecies like a really sleek, animated flipbook. As you flip the pages, the organism slowly and uniformly changes its physical form over vast stretches of geological time. There are no branches splitting off. It's just one single line changing so dramatically that paleontologists eventually have to step in and set arbitrary boundaries just to define where one species ends and the next one begins.
Exam trap alert, you absolutely need to burn this into your memory. First, we have anagenesis. Do not confuse this with cladogenesis. Anagenesis is the single-line evolution that defines our chronospecies, meaning an entire population transforms uniformly together. Cladogenesis, on the other hand, involves a lineage splitting into entirely new, distinct, and reproductively isolated branches. So remember, chronospecies equals anagenesis. Definitely don't mix those up on test day.
Part 2. The incomplete fossil record. Let's explore the gaps in our evolutionary history.
If chronospecies rely on scientists observing a continuous, unbroken flipbook of fossils, we really have to ask the obvious question, why don't we ever find these perfect, unbroken chains in the Earth's crust?
Well, this brilliantly highlights the harsh reality of paleontology. For starters, fossilization is just an exceptionally rare phenomenon. Most organisms decompose completely and rapidly right after death. Plus, we're dealing with severe taphonomic biases, which simply means the fossilization process heavily favors preserving hard structures like bones and shells. Soft tissues are completely lost. Because of this, combined with incomplete sampling across the globe, our geological timeline is absolutely full of massive gaps.
Part 3. Genetic variation and inheritance. The biological engines of change.
Zooming into the microscopic level, you'll need to clearly distinguish between discontinuous and continuous variation. Discontinuous variation means distinct, non-overlapping categories. It is heavily genetic. For example, you either have type A blood or you don't. You can either roll your tongue or you can't. Continuous variation, however, flows smoothly along a complete spectrum from one extreme to the other, like human height or weight, and is heavily influenced by the environment. Think of it as discrete blocks versus a flowing spectrum.
So where exactly does all this variation come from? For your boards and Cambridge exams, you've got to be able to list these biological engines. Genetic mutations, which are literal changes in the DNA sequence, act as the raw material. Then, during meiosis, the behavior of chromosomes, specifically crossing over and chiasma formation during that first meiotic division, totally shuffles the genetic deck. Finally, the random combination of gametes during fertilization creates entirely unique individuals.
Part 4. Biomes and climate factors. Let's map these organisms to their environments.
A biome is the assemblage of plants and animals in a specific geographical area. You can think of a biome as the ultimate environmental staging ground. The specific types of vegetation that manage to grow there and the complex animal interactions that follow are fundamentally dictated by very narrow tolerance limits to 2 main abiotic factors: temperature and precipitation.
Robert Whittaker's classic graph is an absolute must-know for biology students. It elegantly plots average annual temperature directly against annual precipitation. This curve shows exactly how these 2 simple climate factors strictly dictate the major vegetation of any biome on Earth, mapping everything from the freezing cold extremes to the sweltering wet tropics.
Let's look at the absolute extremes. On the brutally cold and dry end, we find the tundra, both Arctic and alpine. Now, this biome represents a massive 1/5 of the Earth's land surface.
Organisms living here are pushed to their absolute biological limits, having to survive brutal winter temperatures plunging to -40°C alongside incredibly low rainfall.
Conversely, clustered right near the equator, we find the Earth's most complex terrestrial biome, the tropical rainforest. It thrives under optimal, year-round warmth and massive precipitation, often exceeding 100 inches a year. It's the exact opposite of the tundra, holding an astonishing 70% of the world's vascular plants and 90% of all invertebrates.
Part 5. Tropical Rainforest Stratification, the incredible vertical ecosystems of the tropics.
Since water and warmth are basically unlimited here, sunlight suddenly becomes the ultimate limiting factor. Imagine the tropical rainforest as a towering, fiercely competitive apartment building. Access to sunlight is literally the currency you need to pay rent, and the higher the floor you live on, the more sunlight you actually get.
We can actually map the floors of this biological building from top to bottom. Way at the top are the emergents, towering trees up to 120 feet tall with massive umbrella canopies. Just below them is the 80-foot canopy layer, which greedily intercepts the vast majority of the light. Next down is the highly humid 60-foot understory. Below that sits the dark shrub layer, receiving less than 3% of the available light. And finally, the ground layer, which is so incredibly dark, with less than 1% light penetration, that plant growth down there is extremely sparse.
Because of this intense, constant shade, plants have been forced to evolve some truly ingenious physical adaptations. Epiphytes, often called air plants, just bypass the dark ground altogether and grow high up on the branches of other trees. Lianas are woody vines that aggressively climb straight up trunks just to reach the canopy gaps. We also see buttress roots, wide wooden flanges at the base of trees that help channel dissolved nutrients, and drip tips on leaves to quickly shed all that massive rainfall so destructive fungi don't start growing.
Part 6. The High-Yield Exam Summary. Get your notes ready.
Let's lock this down right now in your notes. This is your high-yield 10-second summary. Point 1. Chronospecies means single-line anagenesis, absolutely not branching cladogenesis. Point 2. Fossil records are highly incomplete due to rare preservation and heavy bias toward hard bones. Point 3. Genetic variation is either a discrete block, which is discontinuous, or a continuous spectrum, like human height. Point 4. Whitaker's biomes are dictated by temperature plus precipitation. And point 5, rainforests build vertically as a highly specific adaptation to compete for limited sunlight.
You now have a completely structured toolkit spanning all the way from deep time to our modern ecosystems. As you review these facts for your exams, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. If Whitaker's delicate balance of temperature and precipitation shifts rapidly due to global climate change, how will today's incredibly complex lineages adapt? Will they migrate? Will they evolve fast enough, or will their line in the fossil record simply come to an abrupt end? Good luck with your studying, and always keep questioning the science around you.